Joseph Kotrie-Monson is with us to have a legal look at our headlines and what's making the news this week, and joins me. Joseph, thank you for your time. There's so many messages here. Now, one of the reoccurring things are, let me read this because this is very, from Stephen in York. Dispatches and the Sunday Times are not the courts, much that I think that he's wrong, and Russell Brand is innocent until a court says otherwise. And that's something that's come up a lot. I'm going to read lots of those other messages afterwards. But this whole thing, it's interesting that in the latest news is that the Metropolitan Police are saying that they haven't received any complaint. From a legal point of view, let's talk about this. I'm really interested to get your take.
Well, there's so much to unpack here, isn't there? Good afternoon, Tricia. First of all, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I don't like anybody being traduced without right to a fair process. Anything that involves allegations that are anonymized, that makes me feel slightly uneasy. And I think this kind of current trend towards the public dismemberment of public figures on the basis of a kind of well-pooled, albeit, and apparently well-researched and credible newspaper article, and in this case, dispatches as well. Although I wouldn't agree with Russell Brand's characterization of dispatches, which has historically exposed police corruption, among other things, as the mainstream media. But I think the idea, Tricia, that somebody's life can be damaged, sometimes irreparably, certainly their professional reputation, it makes me uneasy.
Yes, because I was just going to say, somebody else has mentioned, and you make a, hi Tricia, why wasn't all the information gathered by Channel 4 dispatches on Russell Brand sent to the police before airing the show last night? As bad as these allegations may be, a person is innocent until proved guilty. What chance does anyone have once the allegations are put out in the public domain? A typical example being Sir Cliff Richards and maybe more celebs. That's from Dave in Poole.
Yeah. And celebs is interesting because it's always celebs we're talking about in this regard, isn't it? And I've given you what my unease is. At the same time, we're not talking about circumstances in which he's threatened, Brand or others, unnecessarily threatened with criminal responsibility, criminal sanctions, criminal penalties. So the idea of all of those same processes necessarily existing for you, it's not quite so straightforward. It's more nuanced because these are people often who already live fantastically privileged lives, and it places a burden, whether you regard it as fair or not, to be seen as exemplary. And Russell Brand, by his own admission, has not lived at stages an exemplary existence. He's very frank about it, and most of what he says about his days of being a Lothario, days of being a drug addict, days of kind of behaving in a selfish way, part of the journey that he professes him to be on, which now sees him having passed through Tricia being some kind of firstly political antagonist of the mainstream, something that you'd know from my politics I'm probably quite sympathetic about. But also increasingly, I don't want to overstate it, but something of a spiritual leader. And I say that with a slight tongue in cheek because there's an element, and it's albeit self-confessed, of a kind of messianic.
But Joseph, you know what I want to ask you? This is really important. So if, in not just this case, but any case, right? If there's this all aired in the media, trial by media, as many people are calling it, if something then goes to court, is this prejudicial? Because how do you get a jury? How does it muddy the waters if there are criminal?
It's very difficult. Yeah, it's very difficult. And in the US, they have a jury selection system, which is the way in which they deal with that. But I think people in the public eye are at a particular disadvantage in this regard. I think the reason for that is that even before it's a case, the usual rules about media only reporting what's said in court once somebody's charged, they're not an adequate remedy because already beforehand, so much has been said. But let's get things straight here. We are talking about circumstances in which he may say, and he does say in that statement, that these statements are inaccurate. You know, that these are, I think he uses a phrase like Baroque exaggeration, you know, a typical Brandian hyperbole. Yeah, absolutely. But what's the remedy for this man? You know, he says, I'm a victim of the mainstream media, but guess what? A remedy does exist that is actually not, you know, many of us aren't entitled to, because it costs a lot of money to hire those types of lawyers. And that is, if your character and reputation are maligned, you sue the maker of those statements for libel. So for him to suggest that he, you know, or for it to be suggested that he doesn't have a remedy to deal with this, he absolutely does. And it's not fair. It's not fair that you should have to defend yourself and launch libel proceedings if you are libeled. Libel, once upon a time, was a criminal offence. No longer. You have to put your money in your pocket and use those courts. It's what politicians did in the sleaze areas of the 90s. David Mellor, even Jeffrey Archer springs to mind in the late 90s, Tory governments. You know, they went to court. One won, one lost. The reality is that is the remedy that's open to this man, and he has the funds. He is an anti-establishment figure, self-professed, and all of that. But he is a man who made fabulous money, not just in television, but in Hollywood. He's making fabulous money now. I think he has a Spotify deal. He has millions and millions of dedicated
millions of people watching him.